The ANC in the Western Cape is fuming after the Referendum Party shut down the R62, which borders the Western and the Eastern Cape yesterday. The party was launching its election manifesto. The provincial ANC alleges that spot checks targeting black people and motorists were carried out by members of the Referendum Party. Joining us now for more on this conversation is Western Cape ANC leader Cameron Dugmore. Mr. Dugmore, thank you so much for your time and for joining us. Now, the RP has since denied these allegations that anyone was stopped and searched at the border of these provinces. What did the ANC base these allegations on that ultimately led to the ANC spokesperson calling the Referendum Party racist?
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, I'm the ANC leader of the opposition in the legislature. But to say that what was done at one level was unlawful. There are laws in this country, the National Land Transportation Act, there's ordinances. No one can go and block a provincial road. This was the R62 that leads from the Western Cape into the Eastern Cape, or the other way around. It's a provincial road. So firstly, the DA Western Cape government is responsible for provincial roads. But it's very interesting that the Referendum Party was allowed to set up a roadblock, essentially what they call a border point check. And there was absolutely no action taken against them by the Western Cape controlled DA provincial traffic, which actually shows that the DA has got a selective approach. Because it's the Referendum Party, their allies who also want so-called Cape independence, which is nothing else than a racist, separatist agenda, effectively a new kind of influx control. The fact that the DA did not take action against people blocking a provincial road shows what is going on here. And what we are now doing as the ANC in the Western Cape, we've looked at the legislation. It's very clear that the law was broken. And we are in the process of preparing a very detailed complaint, a criminal complaint to the South African Police Service, who then need to investigate. Because clearly, okay, I think I'm connecting to another. I'll just get out of that one. If you can see me on this one, I'm very sorry about this.
Yes,
yeah.
We seem to be getting some feedback from you. Yes, Mr. Dugmore, you may continue.
If you can still hear me. So basically, we say that the Referendum Party broke the law. They erected a barricade on a provincial road. They actually interrupted traffic and that is a criminal offense, and charges will be laid. And so that's what we are doing. So the issue of the ANC statement from a national level also points very clearly to the political agenda here. Besides them breaking a law with the active support or basically the DA provincial traffic ignoring this breaking of the law, the real issue is what do they actually want to achieve? And it's an incredibly hurtful action that they've taken, even a so-called symbolic action to set up this border point, because essentially it's doing what apartheid and colonialism have done, which is to basically preserve the Western Cape for certain people and to essentially preserve colonialism. We know the Western Cape was the first part of our country that was colonized, and there have been deliberate attempts, the decimation of the Khoi and the San people, the issue of influx control, trying to stop black people from coming in, setting up hostels, migrant labor, etc., etc. So for this Referendum Party, actually with the support of the DA, to set up a roadblock reminds people of influx control, the hurt, the damage that it had to people's lives. South Africa is a united country. People can go anywhere in this country in search of work in Gauteng, Eastern Cape, Eastern Cape people come to Western Cape, they go to Gauteng looking for work, etc. So what the Referendum Party is doing with the support of the DA is to lay the basis. What they want to try and do is to create an independent republic of the Western Cape. And we as the ANC will never allow that. But the first step is they must be charged. We're going to lay a charge. They must be prosecuted so that it sends a very clear message that you cannot simply go and block a road and think that you're going to get away with it because you have friends in the DA provincial government.
Right. So now the Referendum Party, being a single issue party, says its only objective is to force a referendum on Cape independence. Now, this conversation about Cape independence found traction about 6 months ago in the country, and many critics have said that the ANC seemed to be mum over this issue for a little too long. Why was that so?
Sorry, that we will be mum.
Yes,
that we're being mum about this issue.
Yes, that you have not necessarily engaged this issue to the extent where the ANC seems to be against the possibility of Cape independence.
Well, I'm not sure where Newzroom Afrika gets that particular perspective, because you might remember we've actively opposed and effectively defeated the DA's Provincial Powers Bill, which is part of this notion of wanting to build a federal state, whereas we all know we have a united country with 9 provinces with particular powers and functions. We actively opposed that. The majority of people in public hearings rejected that. And the so-called bill, which the DA brought, has not even been brought back to the legislature. But part of the people that supported that was people like Cape Exit and the Referendum Party. We've made it very clear. South Africa is a republic. We are a united country, a non-racial country. Provinces are there, but we can never allow part of South Africa to want to break away in the way that they want to do it. So we've made our position very clear. We have a constitution in this country. We fought for freedom. We fought for a united country. And we can't go backwards. We can't go backwards to effectively some form of influx control. I mean, imagine. This Referendum Party says they're just interested in a referendum. But what did they do when they launched? They literally enacted, a border post, like a boom gate between the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, which actually reveals their clear intention. So we must be very, very clear. We as the ANC will resist any attempt to divide this country, to create a separate republic. And actually, it's not going to happen. This whole notion of a referendum. I mean, the Referendum Party is making an argument that they want a referendum about this issue, but why should it only be people in the Western Cape? South Africa has one constitution, so if one part of this area or that area wants to break away, surely that's an interest in everyone. There are people in our province that come from all over South Africa. Some people were born here, some people have come here. Phil Craig, the guy who's actually pushing the Referendum Party, he's not even a South African citizen. He was a Brexit supporter in the UK. He now comes to South Africa and wants to start another kind of a Brexit here in the Western Cape. And simply, that is actually creating tension. It's creating division. And we've made it very clear that we support our country's constitution, which allocates powers and functions to provinces, to local governments. And that is the framework in which this country works. So these attempts to divide us and to, literally exit South Africa, first of all, they're not going to work. But secondly, they're actually not assisting us in building unity in this country.
The ANC has not governed the Western Cape for quite some time. In hindsight, what do you think your party would do differently with how it lost the province's confidence, if any? And do you feel that in any way the ANC has led the country in the way that it has given room to parties such as the RP to call for instances such as Cape independence?
Yeah, well, it's very clear that since '94, if you look at the record, there's been clear and undisputed progress in regard to social development, reclaiming of land restitution. There's been laws to protect people from being evicted. There's been 3.5 million houses built. There's no-fee schools. We've had NSFAS giving access to higher education. So anyone, firstly, who disputes the fact that we've made solid progress is actually really not being honest, because the reality and why the ANC has got support over the years is that the majority of people have felt the change. While saying that, the ANC is very conscious of serious mistakes that have been made. We've had to deal within the ANC around issues of corruption. We've had to deal with issues of nepotism and so on. But that's why the ANC, and this is what many people miss, as far back as 2019, we've begun with the ANC Renewal Project. We've needing to confront these mistakes head on because the ANC needs to renew itself. And we are beginning to see the fruits of that renewal. We have a step aside when people who are charged, they step aside. The National Prosecuting Authority, SARS, those institutions have been strengthened. You're seeing PRASA, the key state-owned enterprise, beginning to move, the railway lines coming back. So that change is continuing. The argument that we have in regard to the Western Cape is that because the Western Cape, since 2009, and that's 15 years, they've decided to actually fight national government and to resist programs and projects and policies which can actually benefit the people of the Western Cape. I'll give you a few examples. The DA actively opposes the minimum wage, which is now set at between 4,200, 4,600. They don't want a minimum wage. So when it comes to farm workers and domestic workers in the Western Cape, although it's now law that there's a minimum wage, the DA, as a provincial government, actually undermines the national law and clearly hasn't the political will to say, well, let's support something which pays domestic and farm workers at least a minimum wage. Secondly, less than 3% of agricultural land in our province is owned by black people. By black, I mean African, colored, and Indian. We as the ANC, we're not parties, populist parties like the EFF and others, and saying, chase white people off the land. We're not saying that. But the issue is, if you want sustainable development, then this DA provincial government has got to ensure that African and colored farmers access land, but they have no projects in this province to actually ensure that. And you cannot have sustainable food security, social cohesion, unless the land, as the Freedom Charter says, shall be shared by those who work it. So secondly, when it comes to education, when the ANC governed, we were the number one in the country for matric passes. Because the DA since 2009 has not focused on the poor working class schools in the community, the standard of education has dropped in the Western Cape, and that's factual. You can look at no-fee schools and the number of bachelor passes. Limpopo province has developed a higher number of bachelor passes from the no-fee schools, whereas the Western Cape has actually gone down. We are now number 5. For the first time ever, the Western Cape is below the national average for matrics, and that's because of a neglect. Then, and I'll give a fourth reason. When it comes to the issue of doing away with apartheid spatial planning, there's been no inner city development in Cape Town. The DA has blocked the development of Tafelberg. They've blocked the development of other inner city housing. So essentially, what's happened over 15 years is that the DA is governed for the few, and the reality is that the majority of South Africans in the Western Cape would benefit from working with national government in a constructive way to bring about the change. And so the DA is actually denying the majority of people in the Western Cape the opportunity to benefit from national cooperation. And that is why I think after 15 years, you're beginning to see the DA losing support across communities.
Right.
And that's why we are saying that an ANC government, when we governed, unemployment was lower. We were doing better in education. We had a plan and a strategy to deal with gangsterism and substance abuse. The DA is governed for the few, and that's catching up with them now because they've actually ignored and neglected the majority who are African and colored.
All right, Mr. Dugmore, thank you so much for your time and for your inputs this evening. That was Western Cape Legislature Opposition Leader, Mr. Cameron Dugmore. Now, Newzroom Afrika has reached out to the Referendum Party and they will get a right of reply on the breakfast show tomorrow morning.